It is sometimes translated as stating that morale was 3 times more important than manpower and equipment on the battlefield in war, and that 3/4 of spiritual strength is physical. For the past year, Ukrainian military units have been showing the truth of the words, and it is clear that they are correct, that the French Emperor and Napoleon motivated the entire, convincing them that they were fighting for a moral purpose and aware that they were fighting for the survival of their families and country in what was reportedly a covert military operation. Ukrainian soldiers were successful in pushing back Russian forces. Since Russia began its first invasion of Ukrainian territory in 2014, Moscow has grossly overestimated its own capabilities while grossly underestimating how much Ukraine's military capabilities have developed since that. This self-centered outlook is prevalent in Moscow, a balloon-like situation that burst on the front lines. The Russian army was defeated multiple times due to failures on the front lines. In particular, the Russian army is stalled in the southern region of Ukraine. Explosions of such magnitude are causing the city of Melitopol, which is situated in the southeast of Ukraine, to shake violent. Soldiers from Moscow are straddling the razor's edge between life and death at this location. Let's examine this in detail. The Russian army was forced into a corner as a result of the attacks on Dnipro, and it is common knowledge that Ukrainian forces were responsible for damaging the main bridge in the area. After the bridge over the Malachi River partially collapsed, there is a good chance that supply lines leading to Russian troops will be disrupted. The Malachi River crossing, which is located between Dnipro and the village of Chernivka on the M14 highway just east of the city, was damaged during the night. The video that was uploaded to various social media platforms showed this while the attack was taking place. Due to the explosion, 2 of the bridge's supports were destroyed, and the opening was rendered partially inaccessible to heavy military. As a result, the bridge was reportedly rendered useless. Just 2 days before Ukraine had struck a Russian barracks in a resort city in HIMARS, rockets had caused serious damage as well as loss of life. The attack on the bridge came just after that. After the assault by the Ukrainian army, we would like to bring this to your attention. The Russian invaders suffered a total of 24 casual. Explosions occurred in the city of Melitopol at noon involving a T-62 tank, 5 armored vehicle, and an ammunition depot. In addition, the day before around 1 p.m. loud explosions were heard at the airport and the Zaporizhzhia region, city of Melitopol, which was captured for the time. The invading Russians have set up a military outpost at this airport. HIMARS missiles supplied by the United States were used by Ukrainian armed forces to destroy a Russian military base by directly striking the facility. This caused the base to explode. The detonation of the ammunition caused the ammunition here to go off in a massive explosion. The force of the explosion increased by a factor of. The Kremlin administration has not yet released an official statement regarding the shooting that resulted in casualty losses at the Melitopol air base. At this time, it is not clear what the situation is at the air base. On the other hand, the increasing pressure that the Ukrainians are applying to the Russian forces that are stationed in Melitopol appears to follow a pattern that is analogous to the strategies that were utilized against Kherson prior to its liberation. Both Russian troops and supply lines are targets for the armed forces of Ukraine, including logistical links to the Crimean Peninsula and the Yays. This is because, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, Russia took control of the south, but then found itself trapped there. Let's take a moment to think about the circumstances. In a broader sense, during the time that Russia invaded Ukraine a year ago, one of their most significant early victories came in the southern part of Ukraine. In just a few short days, Russian forces advancing from the Crimea were able to seize control of an area of Ukrainian territory that was larger than Switzerland. The authorities in Ukraine have not provided an explanation as to what went wrong in the south during these early days. On February 22, 2022, at 7:15 p.m., the Secretary of the Security Council of the Ukrainian Federation, Alexei Diallo, was provided with a red file that contained confidential documents. They issued a warning that there was an immediate danger to the presidents. Almost immediately, Mr. Diallo got in touch with the director of the Security Service, the Minister of the Interior of Vladimir Zelensky, the current Prime Minister and President of the country. Despite this, the leadership of Ukraine has not yet implemented martial law in the country at this time. A military mobilization did not take place more than a few weeks. Officials in Ukraine had previously referred to Western warnings of an impending Russian invasion as manipulation and urged everyone to maintain their composure. Daniel Love stated that the government possesses extensive knowledge regarding the planned invasion, including the dates of the invasion. We had been preparing ourselves for it to occur. He explains that the discovery was made on February 22nd when we opened a secret map of the Kiev. He asserts that intelligence reports obtained from a Russian commander confirmed that Russia's primary intention was to invade the country. If Ukrainian officials knew that much about Moscow's plans, they could have done it 2 days earlier than they actually did. Why were Russian forces able to sweep the southern region of Kherson so quickly? There is a straight and narrow strip of land that separates the two areas, the mainland of Ukraine to the Crimea Peninsula, and both of these geographical features, as well as the extensive network of irrigation canals in the Khan region, served as natural obstacles for the Russian military. However, this did not occur, so the Russian advance was not slowed down. The bridges that were supposed to be destroyed by Ukrainian forces were not destroyed. After the invasion, General Staff investigated and found confirmation that the Chandhar Bridge, which spans the strait between Crimea and Kherson, was mined. Nevertheless, he refuted claims that the explosives had been neutralized, stating that Russia's occupation force was 15 times larger than Ukraine's armed. According to Senior Lieutenant Ichenko, who defended the bridge, the Russian invaders were compelled to withdraw from the area from the very beginning as a consequence of this dominance by Russia. As a result, the critics claimed that the destruction of the bridge was specifically because of this dominance by Russia. During their retreat, military vehicles and troops needed 2 hours to make it across the Esko Bridge, which is located close to the city of Kherson and crosses the Dnipro River. This suggests that Ukraine is recruiting a large number of troops near the Crimean Peninsula. Since speed was of the utmost importance to Russia in gaining access to Crimea, Ukraine's strategy consisted of going around Mojo cities rather than through. Mojo General Dmytro Marchenko was tasked with organizing the operation. The defense of Nikola have stated that they intended to take Mykolaiv in 1 day and Odessa in 3 days from the time they started their advance. However, the Russian strategy was unsuccessful because when General Marchenko arrived, there was still no plan to defend the. Marchenko started by taking a roadmap and dividing it up into 4 sections. Before appointing units and commanders to be in charge of each division, they issued a call to action and in a short amount of time registered thousands of people. The majority of the new recruits had prior experience serving in the army. They constructed anti-tank groups armed with grenade launchers and arranged beacon posts to warn when Russian tanks approached the bridges over the irrigation canals in the region. These bridges were not named Kherson. They were wiped out by the impromptu special forces that were led by the deputy Roman Senko. At 12 o'clock in the morning on February 25th, Russian forces began their offensive, which was met with fierce resistance from Ukrainian forces stationed in the area of the Antonovsky Bridge. They were intercepted by Lieutenant Pachenko and the tank battalion under his command. Lieutenant Polchenko said, "My tank took a number of hits, which ultimately led to the system crashing. As a result, we had no choice but to complete everything by," similar to how the Russian forces used the T-34 tanks during the Second World War, or overpowering to the point where Lieutenant Pachenko and the rest of his battalion were forced to evacuate the bridge, but he continued to visit that location on multiple occasions during the night in question. Their tanks were staffed with Ukrainian paratroopers and their mission was to stop Russian soldiers from crossing the bridge. The lieutenant, who was only 23 years old at the time, would go on to receive the highest military honor in Ukraine, the title of Hero of Ukraine. Because of their resistance, Mykolaiv was granted a few additional days to prepare their defense. Coordination and communication between military and civilian teams meant that time was. The movement of Russian troops was constantly monitored by local citizens who then relayed the coordinates to the artillery positions held by the Ukrainians. According to Majo General Marchenko, common citizens were responsible for destroying and capturing armored vehicles. There are 2 Majo contributing factors that have led to the encirclement of Russian troops in the southern region of. Because of the collaborative efforts of the local populace and the courageous soldiers from Kiev, one of them is without a doubt the local populace. The invading Russian forces are hemmed in the southern region of Ukraine, particularly in the cities of Mela, Topo, and Megol. Shortly after bells started to ring to signal the arrival of Russian invading troops in the conflict in Ukraine, we are now 1 year behind. There is currently no indication of the war's conclusion. However, despite Vladimir Putin's best efforts, the upcoming days are not turning out to be as favorable for the Russian military as the forecast had predicted they would be. It is only a matter of time before the tension on the front lines escalates to a dangerous. We will be patient and wait to see what the next move will be for the Moscow army, which has become significantly weaker and has suffered a number of setbacks on the front lines. Do not overlook the importance of subscribing to our channel and giving the videos you watch a like. We appreciate you keeping an eye on us. The shocking news that was revealed in the report that was provided by British intelligence has shaken the apparatus that is used in Ukraine dealing with it has been accomplished in many regions. On the other hand, these events almost drove Russia completely insane, which was was a significant blow to Russia. As the conflict between Ukraine and Russia continues, there have been significant new developments in recent days. The most significant element of this turn of events was the fact that Russia was subjected to the aftermath of large explosions while Ukraine was conducting its operations. Because of these explosions, the Russian army and the Kremlin initially experienced a great deal of fear as the regions occupied by Russia started to be taken back one at a time. Through the operations organized by Ukraine, Russia was forced to flee the occupied territories without turning. This desperation that the Russian army has been going through has garnered attention from the press all over the world. And in the most recent reports, the spread of the war in Ukraine has been one of those three key details. As a direct response to these reports, the British Ministry of Defense has now published and reported on this report. Stunned people all over the world following these most recent operations, Russia further emphasized the significance of its air defense. Russia, which has taken many steps to improve its ground operations, had actually wanted to improve its air defense systems from the very beginning of the war. This desire led to Russia taking many steps to improve its ground operations. However, it had not been successful in doing so. The Russian military, which has been working hard to enhance its air defense system from the moment it was first established, the Ukrainian war, which started on February 20th, has still not been able to realize this development in many parts of Russia. Many parts of Russia still do not even have air defense systems that have been developed at all. This vulnerability, along with the development of UAV technology in Ukraine, could cause significant issues for Russia. Long-range Patriot missiles are currently the source of Russia's greatest headaches. These missiles were developed by the United States. The current range of Patriot missiles presents a significant challenge for Russia because of the fact that these missiles are American-made, reads all the way up to Moscow. It is not possible to speculate on what actions Russia will take with its underdeveloped air defense systems in response to this threat, following that Ukraine's most recent operation revealed Russia's inadequate air defense systems. Once an incredible operation has been carried out by the Ukraine on the Ingles air base, which is owned by Russia. This attack underwent a complete transformation, the difficulty of conducting air-directed operations. This airbase, which was situated in this region of Russia, was considered to be of utmost significance for the Russian. The significance of this airbase lies in the fact that it was the only location in which Russia's weapons that were capable of using the air route but had not yet been developed for use in air operations could be maintained and taken off duty. As a result of this operation, warplanes belonging to the Russian army are unable to attack. Inviting. This airbase, which has great importance in terms of Russia's war strategy, was razed to the ground thanks to the advanced unmanned aerial vehicles of the Ukrainian army. In addition, military personnel were killed during the operation, and the Kremlin raised the threat level to red almost immediately after the blow that was dealt by the operate. Despite the fact that not all of Russia's undeveloped air bases are equipped with air defense systems, during the time that all of the planes were being instructed in the hangars, the ground defense systems were upgraded. As the Ukrainian army continued its operations at full speed, the Russian soldiers were thrown into a state of great panic, which was exacerbated by the massive explosions that were occurring. Unmanned aerial vehicle (UAV) assault on the effectiveness of this operation was once again demonstrated to Russia how much of an advantage the Ukraine has gained despite the fact that it does not yet have fully developed aircraft or air defense systems. People who live in the area where the operation was carried out explained that very large explosions took place in this area. However, the exact result of the operation is unknown. Russian sources claim that they blew up Ukraine's unmanned aerial vehicle. However, with the false news they published, the orchestra, people who live in the area where the operation was carried out, explained that very large explosions took place in this area. Although it was stated that every region that Russian forces attempted to invade was successfully completed, none of the sources can be known by anyone. Due to the fact that this information is contradictory, it is common knowledge that Ukrainian forces successfully repelled Russian ones from these. However, many actual battlefields make no attempt to hide the fact that they exist. Nobody has any faith. The word of my authoritarian rule in Russia, as it were, Putin's desire to justify himself for every wrong he does is seen as the primary source of distrust in the world today. The primary factor contributing to this predicament is the worry that one will become disenfranchised if the work is not of sufficient quality. The endeavor he has taken does not lead to a successful outcome. The situation is reflected in the Russian press as if Putin has succeeded, even though he has not succeeded at every point. As a direct result of this mistrust of the Russian press, the entire Russian public has begun to follow Ukrainian-owned news outlets. According to the statements that were made by British intelligence officials, one of the expectations is that Ukraine will verify the authenticity of the operations that were organized by British intelligence. It was stated that the air bases in all regions of Russia really do not have adequate defenses, and it was also mentioned that the Ukrainian forces are aware of this vulnerability of Russia and that they intend to correct many more operations by utilizing it on their side as much as possible. As soon as these events have concluded, news came off a large fire. The place where this fire occurred it was that he was rather important in the sample test. Allegedly, Ukraine carried out a module attack on the port with unmanned naval vehicles and caused the explosion of an oil tanker, causing everything in the port to burn to ashes. A discreet attack also hit Russia right in the heart. It was that he was a port in the sample test book. The fact that these operations were unsuccessful demonstrated that the Russian forces had a significant weakness on both the front lines of the border defense and the air defense lines. There were some ships that were able to make it through the blaze that was started by a ship carrying oil that was docked at the port. The Kremlin issued a statement saying that they did not know the cause of the explosion in this port and that it prompted an immediate evacuation. He attempted to hide the origin of the operation, including both who was behind it and where it originated, because it appears that Russia is now behind the military and strategic efforts being taken against Ukraine by the world. The image of a country that is unable to protect even its classes in a comfortable manner causes serious, wants to inform policy. Their relations are already poor. Fires had also been set on a different fleet of ships earlier in the explosion that took place in the port of St. Petersburg. The Kremlin, which stated once more that the fire was started by a malfunction, did not place the blame on Ukraine for the. Recently, this has caused a great deal of anger among the general population. The only reason we are working is to cover up the defects that were caused by the operations that have already taken place. Russia, which has endured significant setbacks in every conceivable way, is making every effort to conceal these setbacks from the Russian press. The people of Russia are currently experiencing high levels of anxiety. People in Russia are experiencing widespread panic due to their concern that the conflict will soon spread beyond the borders of Ukraine and into their own country. The Ukraine is continuing to make great strides with the help of its modern and cutting-edge weaponry. Files are rising almost everywhere in Russia. A significant contributor to the fires is the fact that the Ukrainian army is getting so close to the Russian. Ukraine, which has been able to use assistance from all over the world, has significantly altered the path that the war will take. The damage that they are causing with their airstrikes and long-range missiles is getting worse by the quarter every day. The fact that Russia has never been taught about the defense component has begun to cause a significant number of issues after each operation against Russia. Putin doesn't appear to have a plan for how to respond to the situ. Putin believes that a counterattack is the best way to deal with this situation. Due to the fact that this era was made by Russian soldiers, Putin will become very irate as a result of this. Headquarters is right. The Russian army was defeated by the Ukrainian army in this region. The operations that were organized were successful in totally wiping out Russia's achievements. After Putin's anger subsided, he signed some very important document. There is a lack of clarity regarding what will happen to Russia's economy as a result of this. They'll have to do. Since the very first day of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it has never been entirely clear what kind of step would be taken next. It would be taken by the Ukrainian army, but the Ukrainian army was caught off guard and was forced to make a strategic retreat just as it was on the verge of achieving a significant victory over Russia. On the other side of the conflict, the Russian army has been struggling with its never-ending string of defeats. There are many different motivations behind Russia's vote to join the military. However, the most important one is that there are not enough volunteer Russian soldiers, which indicates that Russian soldiers are forced into service. They are unable to achieve their goals because they do not perform well. Huge errors that the Russian people have been attempting to fight with a very serious mobilization ever since the war began. The lack of value placed on the Russian people by Vladimir Putin is at the heart of all of Russia's current difficulties in most of the operations. The number of soldiers was sufficient because of the way he has organized Russian soldiers. The number of Russian soldiers has grown, and they need to be constantly. This is to the advantage of the Ukrainian army. The Wagner mercenary has taken a large number of inexperienced and troublesome soldiers as prisoners, and the Russian army is compelled to keep them behind the front lines. Chechen units and individuals are causing a great deal of trouble for Russian troops. Because of this, Russian soldiers are unable to put up much of a. This results in the front line being staffed with recruits who have low levels of motivation. However, it is unknown how the Russian soldiers who are too inexperienced to make this final error in judgment will be able to win this war. The actions that Russia took inside a military headquarters in DTS have caused the rest of the world to laugh out. it was discovered that the military headquarters was transporting ammunition that was not supposed to be inside, despite the fact that this was an accident caused by Nova soldiers because of their lack of merit. It is common knowledge that commanders in the Russian army are often the ones to pave the way for problems of this nature. This most recent error is connected to it in some way, as investigations have begun into what caused the large explosion that took place at the Russian military headquarters in Tusk. These observations were made by Ukrainian intelligence agents who were working in that region. The unbelievable error committed by the Russian soldier resulted in the total destruction of an entire command post. On the other hand, this error was said to have been caused by the lack of experience and training that the Russian soldier, because the vast majority of Russian soldiers are deployed to the front lines without having received adequate training. Russia is being held responsible for the current predicament. Even though this situation makes Putin very angry, Russia has lost such resources without putting up much of a fight, despite the fact that Russia is already suffering from a serious lack of ammunition and equip. It has something to do with Putin, who is afraid that these soldiers might stage a coup and therefore does not provide them with the appropriate training. To put it another way, one of the issues that has arisen as a direct result of the mass is the surplus of new recruits in the Russian army. This most recent error is the clearest sign that that is the case. A member of the Russian military stationed at the command center in Den. Despite the fact that smoking is prohibited inside the headquarters, VDIs is seen smoking a cigarette near the ammunition. In fact, the commander has not provided even the barest minimum of authorization. The soldiers had agreed among themselves that this particular area would serve as their smoking zone, but the fact that all of the ammunition is there is enough to understand how dangerous it is to smoke in this area. However, it is possible that poorly trained Russian soldiers made such a mistake. The fact that all of the ammunition is there is enough to understand how dangerous it is to smoke in this area. A cigarette is thrown into the air by one of the soldiers while waiting for the ammunition to go. The cigarette button next to a box of gunpowder in that area gave off enough heat to cause all of the ammunition to start exploding. The Russian soldiers, unsure of what to do, decided to evacuate the outpost because they did not know what else to do. After that, the Russian military was subjected to unintended but severe harm at the hands of the Ukrainian. Because of this, the Ukrainian army is able to regain an advantage in Dansk in comparison to the Russian army. According to the war, the mistakes made by Russia have had quite a significant impact on their economy. According to the assessments of economic analysts, the situation facing the Russian economy is extremely dire. As a result of their belief that they would invade Ukraine, the Russians did not produce sufficient quantities of ammunition and equip. Earlier on, this unanticipated resistance from Ukraine led to spending that was significantly higher the budget that was allotted. This resulted in inflation because an excessive amount of money had to be printed in the country, and economic conditions deteriorated as a result of Putin's mismanagement, as was the case in many other areas. Even if Ukraine had responded by sanctioning Russia in any way, shape, or form, Russia would have been on the verge of collapse long before. Now, this was primarily the result of the fact that numerous countries in Europe, as well as the United States, had imposed embargoes since the beginning of the invasion. However, Putin is also partially to blame for the recent tightening of these embargoes to such an extreme. Putin was well aware that he was the primary contributor to all of these issues because of the instability that Russia was going through. He decided to stop permitting public protests. Putin, who is aware of the amount of trouble that these protests are capable of causing, believes that he may be forced to resign. There will be a significant outbreak of civil conflict in Russia. However, the most recent decisions made by the G7 will particularly put Russia's economy in a precarious position. The group of 7 G7 stated that Russia has for a very long time recklessly threatened everyone with nuclear weapons and that this behavior must be stopped by someone. Putin's level of anxiety has increased significantly as a direct result of the G7's. However, the G7 was correct about many of the ways in which Russia had acted to disrupt peace around the world. This move would have extremely negative repercussions for the economies of many countries, including Russia. In particular, the group of 7 G7 has taken action to lend their support to Ukraine. Ukraine, which has received support since the beginning of the conflict, is anticipated to expel Russia from its territory in a short period of time. As a result of this most recent support, due to the fact that this circumstance has created significant unease in Russia, the scales have begun to tip in various parts of the world, and Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of this by engaging in conflict with his various commercial and military partner, owing to the fact that this scenario violates the laws that have been established by the United Nations. One might even say that Russia is now in a corner at this point. The military of another authoritarian state is Russia's unpredictable partner in this relationship. Russia has a vested interest in developing business relationships with nations that it is aware are governed by dictatorships. Similar to, it initially demonstrated this intention by placing an order with Iran to purchase drones. These drones were developed specifically for the purpose of conducting attacks against the Ukrainian army. They were initially rejected by the Russian army, which had placed an order for approximately 1,000 of them. However, intelligence eventually deciphered this trade. In spite of the disclosure, Russia will find itself in a precarious position as a result of these. Iran has been singled out by the Russian military as the most significant source of ammunition. This situation has also shed light on the many challenges that Russia will face in the future. According to the most recent findings, Russia purchases approximately 30,000 artillery shells from Iran on a daily basis. Several resolutions passed by the United Nations are allegedly being broken here. Russia has begun to engage in reckless behavior. Putin, who has only recently begun to exercise dictatorial tendencies, appears to want to start a war that involves the entire world. Should the situation escalate into a nuclear conflict, there will be no planet left to inhabit. As a result, Vladimir Putin and the other leaders of the world have an immediate responsibility to sit down and negotiate very serious agreements regarding nuclear issues. If this does not take place, it is difficult to predict what a mess the world will be in if this continues. As a result of this, Ukraine is receiving support from the West, which is once again shedding light on the increasingly precarious situation in Russia. It is unfortunate that Putin will be forced to step down if the current state of affairs persists. Next news. There are brave soldiers of the Ukrainian army who go unrecognized, but take part in crucial missions while they're stationed on the front lines of the battle. Along with the unsung heroes, we must also remember the foreign legions that served in the Ukrainian army and the elite Chechen group known as Yuria, both of which fought against the Russians. Legion is a group that supports Kiev and fights in the Ukrainian army to ensure Ukraine's independence and to shake Russian leader Vladimir Putin from his seat and, if possible, remove him from it. There are many Chechen fighters who are a part of the Legion. Legion supports Kiev and fights in the Ukrainian army, and despite this, these courageous warriors are still taking part in a variety of operations for Ukraine. Even Chechen troops fighting for the Ukrainian army are not afraid to be in the thick of the action along the front lines in the Donbass region. This includes the most intense firefights. Their fierce nature and unwavering bravery protect them from the dangers they face. The presence of such a force in the Ukrainian army makes it more difficult for the Russian government to pursue expansionist policies in Donetsk and Luhansk. Recent events in the Luhansk region provide the clearest illustration of what this predicament looks like in practice. In the middle of the night, Chechen soldiers serving with the Ukrainian army carried out an operation in the wooded region of Luhan. A large Russian armored convoy consisting of 6 Russian tanks was blown up in this striking operation, which was carried out in a time zone that the Russians were not expecting. Yes, the heroic Chechens who fought for Ukraine did manage to achieve a significant victory, in addition to dealing the Russians one of the heaviest blows in recent history. In the span of just one night, Chechen soldiers fighting on the side of Ukraine were also successful in putting an end to a group of Russian soldiers' resistance. The invading troops didn't know what to do when confronted with such a sudden obstacle at first. An ambush operation that took place at midnight that, as the sounds of artillery and gunfire reverberated throughout the forest of Luhansk, the intruders began rather unexpectedly to comprehend what was taking place. However, by the time that the Russian troops realized this, it was already too late, and the Chechen troops that were fighting for Ukraine had been successful in bringing the name of the group, Free Russian Legion, back to the forefront of public consciousness. The majority of these Chechen fighters are either first or second generation Chechen immigrants who fled the tyrannical rule of Kadi, who emerged as Putin's dictator. Kadi emerged as Putin's dictator in the early 2000s as a result of the post-Soviet wars in Chechnya that Moscow fought in order to eliminate independent Chi. Additionally, there are fewer than 5 Chechen battalions serving in the Ukrainian army, and the total number of Chechen soldiers who are fighting for Ukraine is growing daily. The Chechens claim that they're fighting for Ukraine because they believe it offers the best chance to free the nations that they refer to as being under the yoke of Russia. Muslims who have lived in Ukraine for an extended period of time will attest to the fact that they're free to practice their religion herein. Battalions of Chechen fighters on the Ukrainian side. Unlike Cats, troops who appeared to have been relegated to the background of the conflict, Those who perished in battle on the most intense and dangerous fronts are perhaps not as well known as they should be. Since Russia launched its initial invasion of eastern Ukraine and illegal annexed Crimea in 2014, one of these battalions, known as the Sokhar-Didi Battalion, has been fighting alongside the Ukrainian forces led by Vladimir Zinsky. This battalion was named after the first president of independent Chechnya after the fall of the Soviet Union. Independent Chechnya is now officially known as the Republic of Huria, although it is part of the Ukrainian army and answers to its command. The battalion does not receive any funding from the defense. Adam Osman V41A, a graduate of Wycliffe College, an esteemed public school located in the Cotswolds, and a former student of economics at the University of Buckingham, currently serves as the battalion commander since the 24th of February. The battalion has an impressive track record to show for. Before taking part in the liberation of the city of Islam in the northeastern part of the country, this Chechen battalion engaged in activities of sabotage and reconnaissance to the north of Kiev as the Russians attempted to attack the capital of Ukraine. However, reports indicate that this battalion has been missing in action in the eastern Donetsk region for the past 2 weeks. Chechen fighters have expressed their gratitude towards Ukrainian commanders for not ordering themselves to take unnecessary risks and assault targets in order to meet an unrealistic schedule or an important date. This warning was delivered with particular emphasis to the Chechen forces that had been dispatched to the Donetsk region. The strategy of putting their soldiers in dangerous situations was completely unnecessary. Chechen fighters are frequently unhappy while sitting in the tree, often acting on the front lines and conducting reconnaissance and sabotage. Russian generals, on the other hand, relish the opportunity to take risks. Despite this experience, Chechen fighters suffered fewer casualties than other units did during the conflict. Some Chechen fighters say that the war in Ukraine was much simpler than their previous war in Chechnya, in which they were forced to spend weeks in the mountains without supplies and make do with stockpiles of small arms and ammunition. In comparison, they say that the war in Ukraine was much simpler. Some people refer to it as a 5-star war. These brave warriors are used to fighting in dangerous environments and under adverse conditions. On the other hand, Chechen fighters in the Sheikh Mansour Battalion coordinate their actions with the Ukrainian forces, but they do not join the official armed forces and instead rely on donations, volunteers, and awards for financial support. Simply listening to the experience of one member of this battalion is sufficient to understand the full scope of the problem. RB is the name of this service member. Since the year 2019, RB has made his home in Ukraine. While he was on the run from the mercenaries, he moved out of his house. One of his brothers was killed in the First Chechen War, and the other was killed in the Second Chechen War. While working for Chechen, President Ramzan Kadyrov RB kept his participation in the Sheikh Mansour Battalion a secret from his family while he was away fighting. His mother thinks that he is in Kiev at the Second Chechen War was not the first time that RB had fought against Russia. As a result, RB wants to bring attention to the differences between the war in Chechnya and the war in Ukraine. Although the territory in Chechnya was much smaller and the enemy population was much more concentrated, the Russian military employed strategies that were very similar. They fight in the same manner as they did during World War II, despite the fact that they now have drones at their disposal to guide the artillery they use. Because of this, our emphasis is placed on the fact that the situation is significantly more dangerous. RB has high hopes that following Ukraine's victory, the Chechen rebels will follow the example of many other Chechen fighters and return to their homeland too. The account of yet another individual who was a member of the Chechen forces is even more remarkable. A Chechen commander with a Russian prize of 500,000 rubles, or approximately 1 million on his head, was hiding out in a bunker beneath the city of Bakhmut where fierce fighting was taking place, is still missing and has not been. It is said that this legendary commander, who is described as the darkest and deadliest warrior among the allies that Ukraine has gathered in its war with Russia, is still fighting for the Ukrainian army on the front lines. This is despite the fact that the war between Ukraine and Russia has been going on for quite some time. As can be seen from all of these different examples, fighting Russia has become a way of life for a significant number of Chechen dissidents and separatists who live outside of Chechnya and who travel from all over Europe to join a volunteer battalion in Ukraine. Moscow's repeated use of military force in Chechnya over the course of several decades, even over the course of centuries, the conflict in Ukraine has become much too personal. Volunteers are warning that the Russian bear will not stop there if the Ukraine is not defended. If it is invaded since the beginning of February, the public figure, Ansar Mosqueda from Chechnya, who is also the son of the former president of the unrecognized state of Huria, has made multiple trips to Kiev in order to disseminate these warnings. As one of the most prominent representatives of the separatist government of Chechnya, he held meetings in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with politicians, officials, and deputies as well as the parliament. He spoke with Chechens who served in other units of the Ukrainian armed forces, as well as Chechens who fought in volunteer battalions, such as those named after Sheikh Mansour. And so, as a result of this union, the Chechen fighters serving in the Ukrainian army experienced a significant boost in both their morale and their motivation. Additionally, Chechen fighters operating under Ukrainian command harbor the hope that a victory will bring about a political crisis in Russia, which will ultimately lead to Kharov ouster. The most surprising aspect of the conflict involving Chechens and Ukrainians is the fact that, for me, the information that was published in the press that a Chechen group of approximately 300 people who called themselves the Death Squad had begun operating in the Donbass region in favor of the Ukrainians was the most significant factor. These Chechens who fought against the pro-Russians in eastern Ukraine also stated that they have been in this region since May 2014, and that 70% of them were working from various units of the Special Forces. These Chechens were involved in the fighting in eastern Ukraine at the present time. It is asserted that this unique unit can still be found operating on the most vital front lines within Ukrainian T. In a nutshell, the Chechen forces that are currently serving in the Ukrainian army include a significant number of professional soldiers, despite the fact that Russian leaders Vladimir Putin and Ramzan Kadyrov have referred to Chechens fighting for Ukraine as traitors. These courageous Chechen fighters have made it clear on multiple occasions that they have no intention of surrendering in the fight for their own. We have high hopes that with the assistance of these brave soldiers, the Russian occupation of our Ukraine will be ended as quickly as possible, and that Ukraine will regain its former status as an independent nation. We kindly ask that you do not overlook the necessity of subscribing to our channel. In addition, make sure that your notifications are turned on so that you are aware of any new videos. Our knowledgeable team takes great care in preparing our content for you. This information can only be found on the Ultimate Ukraine channel. On YouTube, we pursue legal action against any and all channels, social media platforms, and websites that make unauthorized use of our content. We appreciate you keeping an eye on us. A surprising and shocking move by Turkey on its way to the Ukrainian army is the most significant assistance package it will ever. This will add another element of complexity to the conflict in Ukraine. When Putin found out about this, he lost his temper within the Kremlin. A code red alarm was activated speculating on what the future holds for Russia. Putin became absorbed in his thoughts. The information that is being collected from the front is not the move that Turkey made in response to this has brought the entire world to its feet, which is encouraging for Russia. The Russian press has portrayed this development as a significant act of betrayal on the part of Russia's ally for some time now. The level of support garnered by either side in Russia's conflict in Ukraine has had a direct bearing on how far the conflict has progressed. As a result of the widespread support that was given to the Ukrainian side, it was found that Russia had gotten itself into a hole from which it would not be possible for Russia to climb out of. As a direct response, Putin never stopped naming the countries that were on Ukraine's side and threatening them. However, no nation was hesitant to lend their support to the Ukrainian military because they believed their cause was just. This move was initiated by Turkey, which is credited with the invention of barricades, which have been regarded as a deciding factor ever since the conflict first. Since the beginning of the conflict, a significant amount of Ukraine's success can be attributed to the countries that have been providing support to the Ukrainian army. It had never been seen before until this war that unmanned aerial vehicles could be used so effectively in any war. In other words, these weapons are considered to be the decisive factor here. Barak stars, which are considered to be a great breakthrough, especially in terms of intelligence, have a different place. This is so significant that until this war, it had never been seen that unmanned aerial vehicles could be used in such a way. The analysts did not initially consider certain aspects of the war when making their assessments, but once it was discovered that they were so successful, the history of the war was rewritten to reflect their significance. The Turkish government did everything in its power to lend Ukraine a significant helping. Since the start of the conflict, Turkey has demonstrated a significant commitment to supporting Ukraine by taking a number of important steps. The invasion of Ukraine was halted in a significant manner as a direct result of the Bayraktar's victorious efforts. In spite of the fact that this development was widely praised in the international press, Turkey has resolved to keep providing assistance despite the fact that Western nations are slowing for coming to each other's aid, one after the other. Throughout this essential assistance from Turkey was of utmost significance. The training that was provided by the Turkish Special Forces, which had gained prestige all over the world, particularly excited the Ukrainian army. This was especially the case for Turkey's justification for providing this assistance was that it was necessary to stop Russia, which had illegally occupied Ukraine, from advancing in the region. The fact that Turkey, which is constantly pushing for NATO to do much more, was involved in the conflict in Ukraine was a very significant development for the Ukrainian front. Holding meetings at this point, If you come to the details of Turkey's support package, we have already mentioned how effective the aerial vehicles are that the Turkish defense industry has created from scratch by taking important steps. We have also mentioned how effective the aerial vehicles are that the Turkish defense industry has created from scratch by taking important steps. The government of Turkey recently made the startling decision to construct the new bar factory in. Putin, who was already on the verge of losing, became very angry as a result of this development. On the other hand, this made the Ukrainian front very happy. As a direct result of this decision, Turkey dispatched its special forces to the area so that they could receive training. Soldiers in training who will be equipped with the knowledge and skills necessary to manage operations against the Russian army. This would begin the process of modernizing the Ukrainian army. In addition to adding to the recent successes of the Ukrainian army, Turkey's response to Zelensky's request for fighter jets came after the Russians suffered successive defeats on multiple. For a long time, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has pointed to the acquisition of fighter jets as the most pressing requirement for the Ukrainian armed forces. In exchange, because this could potentially start a third world war, no nation is willing to provide them out of fear that it will. However, Turkey has already taken the first and most significant step in this direction by criticizing the United States for its refusal to provide F-35 or F-16 aircraft. It was announced that once they're produced, they will send 7 Red Apples, which is one of the projects being worked on by the Turkish defense industry. At the same time that this caused a great deal of excitement on the Ukrainian front, a red alert was sounded in the Kremlin. This was due to the fact that it was obvious that the Russian army had not anticipated powerful fighter jets. In point of fact, due to the fact that Russia was confronted with so many challenges since the beginning of the war, it has been inspected and it has been characterized as a stepchild, which will guarantee that it will lose the war. This particular support was not restricted to only. The United States has made the decision to give the Ukraine long-range Patriot missiles, which it has stated will start World War III. Following the announcement of this decision, Moscow began to experience a very significant amount of anxiety. When the Russian people found out about this, they immediately began organizing very serious protests, despite the fact that they did not have economic or intellectual freedom and were headed toward an even more dire situation. With the possibility of the war moving inside Russian borders, Putin began to fulfill the demands of the protesters who withdrew after being suppressed by very harsh interventions. This caused Putin to start to fulfill the demands of the protesters. The Russians, who wanted to ensure that they and their families would always have a safe place to live, insisted that air defense systems be installed on each and every street in Moscow. This made me think about the possibility that the United States might change its mind about the F-16s, given that the United States previously held similar thoughts about the Patriots, but ultimately decided to change its small internal structure type. Putin took a significant action despite the fact that Moscow is no longer in danger in response to the prospect that the F-16s could be involved in a scenario very similar to the one described. By taking this action, Putin has once again opened the door to the possibility that they will lose the war. On the other hand, this was just the beginning of the demonstrations. The uprisings of the people did not end when they began. There were a number of factors that contributed to these riots, the most important of which was mobile. The Russian government's decision to conscript a large number of young people into the military under the guise of mobilization has prompted strong reactions. Young men and women from Russia, both within the army and among the general population, were recruited to fight despite having no education whatsoever. This was the primary factor that led to Russia's defeat in many different areas. In addition to the fact that the army was so inexperienced, the fact that Russia had withdrawn from 70% of the territories it had occupied since the beginning of the war also led to a return to the equipment that was used during the time of the Soviet era. This was because Russia could not buy many of the pieces of equipment it had left behind because it had vacated those territories. The Russian army has evolved into a more modern force as a result of this. The extremely frail Russian soldiers who used weapons that were at least half a century old against Ukraine began to injure themselves while using these weapons. This occurred not only as a result of the fact that certain weapons caused pain to the user while training, but also as a result of the fact that Russian soldiers who wanted to go home were doing it on purpose. Putin's lack of appreciation for the army was another factor that contributed to the demoralization of the Russian military. In addition to Ukraine's string of victories, the overwhelming majority of its armed forces members joined because they were required to do so by their government. This served as the impetus for a significant crisis. In light of Putin's decision to put on administrative leave, any generals who might be plotting a coup Putin had for a considerable amount of time been pursuing policies with the intention of preventing the Russian army from becoming sufficiently power. In spite of the fact that Russia was going to face significant challenges as a result of this situation in the future, Putin did not permit the military to become more powerful so that he would not lose his power, particularly in recent times. The fact that the Russian army is unable to take even the tiniest step on its own has shed light on the amount of pressure that Putin has. It was just recently discovered that Putin has not run an honest and merit-based government in any of the countries he has ruled. Putin was forced to make some very difficult choices as a result of the fact that this situation brought people from a diverse range of backgrounds together to oppose him. The National Guard, also known as Putin's army, was given unrestricted powers, and as a result, even the most insignificant attempt at rebelling against the government could result in very severe consequences. Putin's goal was to be recognized in Russia as a dictator, not as someone who justly ruled the country, and as a result, he desired to remain in power indefinitely, and that began to bring the most significant problems, one after the other in rapid success. Given all of these challenges, it was only a matter of time before Russia was plunged into even greater upheaval. The only thing that can completely fix this corrupt and troubled situation in Russia is for Putin, who is at the root of these problems, to step down from his position as president. What exactly is the function of a hammer? Even though it has a wide variety of applications, the word hammer has a very specific meaning in Russian. The hammer has inspired terror in the Russian people. Everyone might find it strange to learn that Russians have a fear of the hammer. Examining the life of Dmitry Shiko is necessary if we are to comprehend the rationale behind the Russians' irrational fear of the armor. Before Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, gave the order to invade Ukraine, he was admired by tens of millions of young people living in. Dmitry Anko was one of those individuals. Dmitry had a deep affection for Putin. He had great respect for Putin's intimidating demeanor. He was sympathetic to Putin's extreme right-wing views. He had great respect for Putin's uncompromising stance toward other nations. Dmitry wished for Putin's adversaries, whoever they might have been to Per. Dmitry was eager to serve Russia and Putin in any capacity that he could. He was constantly on the lookout for new opportunities, and he was able to seize his opportunity. At last, there was a recruitment drive being conducted by the Russian mercenary group back in that region. Dmitry held the Wagner Group in exceptionally high. After learning that the Wagner Group was looking for new recruits, Dmitry wasted no time in submitting his application. Soldiers who joined the Wagner Group were offered a competitive salary and the opportunity to advance their careers in Russia. Putin has come to the defense of the Wagner Group, and their illegal activities are being overlooked. They cannot even be touched by humans. The Moscow government chooses where the Wagner Group's trained soldiers will engage in combat, and those locations are communicated to the Wagner Group with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Evgeny Pisin, the founder of the Wagner Group, is continuing to consolidate his position as a powerful figure. Isin, who is known to have strong ties to Putin, has recently emerged as a prominent figure in the Russian media and has been making forceful state. These statements are respected and cherished by the people of Russia, as is the practice of praying for their well-being. In recent years, Prigozhin has established a reputation for himself as a powerful figure in the state's upper echelons. These days, he is one of the most effective troops Russia has in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Many people believe that he will succeed Putin as president of Russia in the near future. Dmitry looked up to this powerful figure, and as a result, he had a burning desire to become a member of the Wagner Group and one of Ferguson's most influential men. The realization of Dmitry's ambition to rise through the ranks of the Russian armed forces was his most important goal. Dmitry's excitement level skyrocketed as he took in Russia's war prop. Dmitry planned to use the tenets of the Wagner Group in order to achieve his goals of becoming an extremely successful commander who instilled fear in his adversaries. But in order to do well on the tests given by the Wagner Group, he had to put in a lot of effort studying. Dmitry put in long hours of labor, participated in a variety of sports, and eventually became a member of the Wagner Group after he was successful in completing their task. Dmitry found this stage of the acceptance process to be very exciting. After Dmitry was accepted, he immediately began his training for battle because Dmitry discovered that he was not very good at aiming while he was in training. His training took significantly longer than it normally would. Culture. The hammer has inspired terror in the Russian people. Everyone might find it strange to learn that Russians have a fear of the. Examining the life of Dmitry Shiko is necessary if we are to comprehend the rationale behind the Russians' irrational fear of the armor. Before Vladimir Putin Putin, the president of Russia, gave the order to invade Ukraine. He was admired by tens of millions of young people living in Russia. Dmitry Yash, ANCO, was one of those individuals. Dmitry had a deep affection for Putin. He had great respect for Putin's intimidating demeanor. He was sympathetic to Putin's extreme right-wing views. He had great respect for Putin's uncompromising stance toward other nations. Dmitry wished for Putin's adversaries, whoever they might have been, to perish. Dmitry was eager to serve Russia and Putin in any capacity that he could. He was constantly on the lookout for new opportunities, and he was able to seize his opportunity. At last, there was a recruitment drive being conducted by the Russian mercenary group back in that region. Dmitry held the Wagner Group in exceptionally high regard. After learning that the Wagner Group was looking for new recruits, Dmitry wasted no time in submitting his application. Soldiers who joined the Wagner Group were offered a competitive salary and the opportunity to advance their careers in. Putin has come to the defense of the Wagner Group, and their illegal activities are being overlooked. They cannot even be touched by humans. The Moscow government chooses where the Wagner Group's trained soldiers will engage in combat, and those locations are communicated to the Wagner Group with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Evgeny Ferguson, the founder of the Wagner Group, is continuing to consolidate his position as a powerful figure. Putin, who is known to have strong ties to Putin, has recently emerged as a prominent figure in the Russian media and has been making forceful statements. These statements are respected and cherished by the people of Russia, as is the practice of praying for their well-being. In recent years, PSEN has established a reputation for himself as a powerful figure in the state's upper echelon. These days, he is one of the most effective troops Russia has in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Many people believe that he will succeed Putin as president of Russia in the near future. Dmitry looked up to this powerful figure, and as a result, he had a burning desire to become a member of the Wagner Group and one of Ferguson's most influential men. The realization of Dmitry's ambition to rise through the ranks of the Russian armed forces was his most important. Dmitry's excitement levels skyrocketed as he took in Russia's war propaganda. Dmitry planned to use the tenets of the Wagner Group in order to achieve his goals of becoming an extremely successful commander who instilled fear in his adversaries. But in order to do well on the tests given by the Wagner Group, he had to put in a lot of effort, study. Dmitry put in long hours of labor, participated in a variety of sports, and eventually became a member of the Wagner Group after he was successful in completing their tasks. Dmitry found this stage of the acceptance process to be very exciting. After Dmitry was accepted, he immediately began his training for battle because Dmitry discovered that he was not very good at aiming while he was in training. His training took significantly longer than it normally. During this time, Russia was getting ready to start its grant program at the same time that it was beginning to implement its plans to invade Ukraine. However, despite Dmitry's intense yearning to engage in combat on the battlefield, nothing of the sort transpired in accordance with Dmitry's assumptions. The Wagner Group's most capable soldiers were selected to participate in the conflict. However, Dmitry was not one of those soldiers. Dmitry's anger drove him to resume his training, but this time he did so with a greater sense of purpose. He made up his mind to train hard like the other soldiers and join them on the battlefield. Once he had achieved his goal of becoming a powerful soldier, every Russian soldier that had been sent to the conflict eventually succumbed to their wounds, and the successful operations of the Ukrainian army were inflicting enormous losses on the Russian army, and the rapid deaths of the Wagner Group soldiers were the most significant losses the Ukrainian army sustained as a result of these operations. Prigozhin and the owner of the Wagner Group were both incensed by the news and made the decision to deploy an increasing number of soldiers to the battleground. If this decision is implemented, Dimitrov will also be sent to the battle. After hearing this news, Dmitry was filled with a lot of excitement and he went out to the battlefield with a lot of enthusiasm. But when he arrived there, he saw that nothing was the way he had anticipated it to be. The brutality of war was something that Geometry had never experienced. Only what he had seen on screen was all he was aware. However, after witnessing the gruesome killing of people during the war, he gained a better understanding of what war truly entails. Dmitry, like everyone else in his unit, was overcome with grief over the loss of his friends. When he was confronted by Ukrainian soldiers, he was unable to fire his weapon because he believed that the soldiers were people with families of theirs. At that very moment, he started to comprehend the reason why the majority of people on the planet were against this war. After entering the conflict, Demetrius was under the impression that his circumstances were dire because he was confronted so acutely with the truth of the situation. He was convinced that he needed to get away from that environment as quickly as he was concerned that his superior officers would find out about it and punish him, so he refrained from telling his other friends about it. However, he was compelled to take action. Dmitry came to the conclusion that the best course of action would be to hand himself over to the soldiers of the Ukrainian army. During the chaos of the battle, Dmitry reasoned that it would be prudent to surrender consolidated consolidator. He exited his apartment late in the evening. They went to great lengths not to be discovered because he was well aware that if they were discovered, things would go from bad to worse. Dmitry witnessed Russian soldiers standing guard as he was being dragged away from the scene. Instantaneously, he came to a stop and waited for them to leave the area. After the Russian soldiers had moved away from him in a different direction, he moved once more. However, the Russian soldiers were able to spot him. The moment the Russian soldiers who came across Dmitry promptly informed their superiors of the situation they had just witnessed. The commander began to examine the view through the binoculars held by Dmitry Vegas. Sniper rifles were ready by the Russian soldiers in preparation to kill him. On the other hand, the Russian commander did not wish for Dmitry to be killed and instead gave the order for him to be taken captive alive. On the orders of their commander, the Russian soldiers acted swiftly as soon as they saw the threat. As Dmitry made his escape, he could hear footsteps following closely behind him. When he turned around, he saw that 3 soldiers from the Vanner group were following closely behind him. After a brief period of disbelief, Dmitry began to speed up his. After hearing the sound of gunshots in the environment, the Ukrainian reconnaissance drone began to scan the area where the incident took place. This was done in an attempt to stop the fleeing soldier who was being pursued by soldiers from the Wagner group. Soldiers from Ukraine who watched the footage from the drone were taken aback. As soon as the Ukrainian soldiers saw the footage, they expressed a desire to assist the Russian soldier who was trying to. They launched an assault on the soldiers who were pursuing Dmitry video drone. But they launched an assault on us as well. 1 soldier was killed and 1 was endured. But Count Dmitry was the last soldier standing. Dmitry was quickly placed in handcuffs, and he was transported to the headquarters. The Wagner Group is known for their severe treatment of deserting soldiers. Hammers are used as a form of discipline by the leaders of Wagner groups. A precedent for this kind of thing has already been established with a soldier who went by the name Nose, and Nen was apprehended while attempting to elude the Wagner Group, who then executed him with a hammer. They shared the video on various social media platforms. The horrified reactions from viewers all over the world were shared. In response to the video, the United States took action against the Wagner Group in a statement made by the U.S. Treasury Department. It was stated that the Wagner Group was a significant member of the international criminal community. In recent times, there have been dozens of encounters between the Wagner Group and the Russian armies. Later, Wagner in Afghanistan. Prigozhin accused Valery Vailov, the chief of the Russian General Staff, and Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, of treason, and claimed that they were prevented from sending aid to his. Preen was also of the opinion that Wagner's victories in Ukraine had been fraudulently taken by the Russian army. However, the difficulties brought on by the protracted nature of the war are becoming increasingly widespread throughout the Russian army. In the coming days, we will find out what exactly will take place. What are your thoughts on Dmitry, who was apprehended by the Wagner Group while he was on the consider the Wagner Group to be a criminal organization? In your opinion, I was wondering what your thoughts were on Yevgeny Ferguson, the man who started the Wagner Group. The values that we place on your input cannot be overstated.